What was supposed to be a takedown turned into a masterclass, and the courtroom wasn't ready for it. No one saw it coming, least of all Elon Musk. When Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh directly addressed him during the high-stakes hearing, the entire courtroom fell into stunned silence. With a commanding voice and unwavering authority, she pointed straight at the tech magnate. "Mr. Musk," she said sharply, "your conduct reflects a clear disregard for well-established legal precedent." Her words cut through the tension like a knife. But what happened next silenced even the most seasoned members of the judicial panel. Elon Musk didn't so much as blink. He didn't flinch or retreat. Instead, with calm composure, he reached for a folder sitting in front of him, one that would shift the entire trajectory of the trial. What was meant to be a legal reckoning for the world's richest man was on the verge of unraveling, and fast. If you're curious to witness genius unfold in real time, watch this video till the end. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more jaw-dropping legal showdowns the mainstream media won't dare to broadcast. The tension in the courtroom was already at a boiling point. The case, Federal Communications Commission v. X Corp., had made its way to the Supreme Court after months of growing controversy. At the heart of the issue, whether Musk's social media platform had breached federal communication standards by refusing to apply new content moderation measures. Justice Kavanaugh, appointed by former President Trump and widely respected for her rigorous constitutional interpretation, had become a towering presence in America's legal landscape. Her sharp intellect and methodical approach had earned her admiration even from those who often opposed her rulings. On this day, Musk sat at the respondents' table in a modest dark suit and a plain blue tie, no hint of billionaire extravagance. His legal team flanked him, but unlike most in his position, Musk wasn't about to stay quiet. He had made it clear he would speak for himself, a decision many legal analysts had called reckless, perhaps even arrogant. The government's case seemed ironclad. For months, headlines had blasted Musk and his company, X Corp., for allegedly ignoring federal communication protocols. Legal pundits had gone on air predicting severe consequences. The FCC had amassed what looked like overwhelming evidence, documented patterns of noncompliance, damning internal memos, and timeline violations. This case isn't just about regulations, the Solicitor General argued in opening remarks. It's about whether private corporations, no matter how massive or how wealthy their owners, are subject to the same rules as everyone else. What the courtroom didn't know, however, was that Elon Musk had been preparing for this showdown for nearly a year. Quietly, methodically, he had immersed himself in constitutional law, dissecting precedents and rulings with the intensity of someone preparing for battle. And soon, the full force of that preparation would come to light. Justice Kavanaugh began her examination with pinpoint focus. The gallery was packed. Journalists, law students, top legal minds, all crammed into the room to witness what had quickly become the most watched Supreme Court case in decades. "Mr. Musk," Kavanaugh began, her tone deliberate, "your platform has repeatedly failed to respond to formal requests for compliance under Section 230, as revised in the 2023 Communications Act. Can you explain why your company believes it's not obligated to follow the same standards imposed on other communication platforms?" Musk leaned slightly toward the microphone, his voice steady. "With respect, Justice Kavanaugh," he replied, "that's not exactly the case. We've never claimed to be exempt from legitimate laws," Musk stated evenly. Justice Kavanaugh raised a skeptical eyebrow. "Your actions seem to suggest otherwise. According to our records, you've received 17 formal notices." 16, Musk calmly interjected. Kavanaugh's gaze sharpened. "I'm sorry, what?" "There were 16, not 17. And we responded to every one," Musk clarified, his tone respectful but firm. Each reply included legal reasoning grounded in established precedent. Kavanaugh rifled through the papers before her. "The official record indicates the FCC's documentation is incomplete," Musk interrupted again, an act nearly unheard of in a Supreme Court setting. A ripple of gasps moved through the courtroom. Chief Justice Garland looked prepared to step in, but Kavanaugh raised her hand slightly, signaling she would continue without intervention. Her expression hardened. "Mr. Musk, this court has limited tolerance for semantic quibbles. We're here to discuss substance, not sidestep it. The broader concern remains your company's repeated disregard for federal regulation." Musk calmly flipped open the folder in front of him. "What may appear as noncompliance," he said, is, in reality, adherence to the Constitution. And I believe the court will want to examine evidence showing that the FCC has, in fact, misrepresented our position. The courtroom bristled with tension. Justice Kruger exchanged a glance with Justice Carlin. Justice Kethledge leaned forward, visibly intrigued. Kavanaugh's voice sharpened. Mr. Musk, this court has thoroughly reviewed every brief submitted in this case. Are you implying we've overlooked something critical? Not at all, Musk replied. What I'm saying is that certain information was intentionally withheld by the petitioners before it ever reached this court. The Solicitor General from the FCC stood abruptly, his voice raised. Your Honors, this is a baseless and inflammatory accusation. Before he could continue, Kavanaugh's voice cut through the noise. Mr. Musk, those are extremely serious claims. If you can't back them up with substantial evidence, it will significantly undermine your credibility before this court. Musk remained composed. I'm well aware of the weight of what I'm saying, Justice Kavanaugh, which is precisely why I came prepared. The regulatory demands made by the FCC, as I will demonstrate, violate not one, but three separate Supreme Court precedents, including a case in which you authored the majority opinion. Kavanaugh's face gave nothing away, but to those who had followed her career closely, the slightest flicker of surprise was evident. And which opinion are you referring to? She asked. Net Choice v. Paxton, 2024, Musk responded. In that decision, you specifically wrote that government bodies cannot coerce private platforms into adopting content policies that effectively act as government speech, enforced through regulatory backchannels. A hush fell across the chamber. It was as if the air had been sucked out of the room. For the first time, Justice Neil Gorsuch, who had remained quiet throughout the proceedings, spoke up. Mr. Musk, he asked, are you saying the FCC's directives amount to that kind of overreach? Yes, Justice Gorsuch, Musk replied. And I've compiled a detailed analysis that outlines exactly how. The FCC's lead counsel stood once more, his frustration visible. Your Honors, Mr. Musk is not a trained legal scholar. His interpretation of the opinion in question is deeply flawed and clearly self-interested. But Kavanaugh was no longer looking at him. She was scanning the documents that Musk's legal team had submitted through the court clerk. Her expression remained neutral, yet her focus was absolute. Then, without looking up, she asked, does the petitioner dispute the authenticity of these communications? The FCC's attorney paused, clearly caught off guard. We would require time to review the material that's been submitted, he said cautiously. What Justice Kavanaugh did next took everyone by surprise. Instead of addressing the Solicitor General, she turned back to Elon Musk. You anticipated this exact line of questioning, she remarked, not as a question, but a statement. This was no longer a defense. It was the masterclass no one saw coming. Still, Musk replied, I did. Because the constitutional stakes here go far beyond X Corp. This case is about whether a federal agency can exploit regulatory power to accomplish something it isn't legally permitted to do outright. The mood in the courtroom had shifted dramatically. What many assumed would be a public scolding of a bold billionaire was quickly evolving into a far deeper and more consequential constitutional dispute, one no one had seen coming. Justice Kavanaugh, renowned for her meticulousness, didn't let up. Even if we entertain your position regarding the FCC's intentions, she pressed, your platform still failed to comply with formal directives issued under existing law, all while you were preparing this challenge. That's not how our legal system is designed to function, Mr. Musk. Musk responded without hesitation. Actually, Justice Kavanaugh, in Youngstown Sheet and Tube Company v. Sawyer, this court held that when a party believes a government directive may be unconstitutional, they may seek judicial relief before complying, particularly when immediate harm is at stake. While developing our challenge, we filed for emergency stays in 3 separate circuit courts. Kavanaugh's eyes narrowed subtly. She was clearly re-evaluating the man before her. This wasn't just a tech executive dabbling in legal arguments. He had clearly studied the law in depth. Those requests for stays were all denied, she pointed out. Correct, Musk nodded. But they were split decisions. And in the D.C. Circuit case, Justice Akawumi wrote in her dissent that the constitutional questions we raised were significant enough to merit full review by this court. Across the room, Justice Akawumi, now hearing his own reasoning echoed back at her, lifted an eyebrow slightly, the recognition clear. The Solicitor General, sensing the court's attention drifting away from his argument, jumped in. "Your Honors," he said, trying to reassert control, "Mr. Musk's speculative theories don't change the facts. X-Corp has violated straightforward, lawful regulatory rules, repeatedly." But Kavanaugh wasn't finished. "Counselor," she said firmly, "the constitutionality of those rules is exactly what seems to be under review at this moment." She returned her focus to Musk. "Go on, Mr. Musk." What followed would be discussed endlessly in newsrooms and debated across social media platforms for weeks. Standing in the most powerful court in the nation, Elon Musk delivered a carefully constructed constitutional argument, one that even his most vocal critics couldn't easily dismiss. "Justice Kavanaugh," Musk said, his voice steady, "if I may, I'd like to direct the court's attention to page 47 of the materials we submitted." He waited as the justices located the page. "These are internal FCC communications," he continued, "obtained through Freedom of Information Act requests. They contain explicit discussions about how to circumvent the limitations established by the net choice ruling." Kavanaugh examined the document. Her face, usually composed and unreadable, began to shift ever so slightly into something more serious. "These appear to be authentic FCC memoranda," she said slowly. "They are," Musk confirmed. "Please note the highlighted section. Commissioner Thompson writes, and I quote, 'While Kavanaugh's opinion restricts our direct authority over content moderation, the technical compliance regulations give us an alternative pathway to achieve the same outcome.'" A low murmur rippled through the courtroom as more justices leaned in to examine the documents. The atmosphere was electric, no longer just tense, but charged with genuine curiosity and legal significance. Justice Kavanaugh looked up, her gaze sharpened. "Mr. Michael Dreeben," she said, her voice firmer now, "would you care to respond to these documents?" The government's attorney appeared briefly unsettled. "Your Honor, taken without context, isolated communications like these can be misleading. The FCC's actions were carried out in good faith, with the intention of upholding legitimate public interest standards." "The context is right there," Musk interjected smoothly, pointing to the following pages, including meeting minutes where officials openly discussed using technical compliance rules as a convenient pretext. He paused, "Their terminology, not mine. To pressure platforms into adopting moderation policies this court has already found constitutionally problematic." Justice Kavanaugh turned again to the Solicitor General. "Counselor," she said pointedly, "I will need to personally review these documents." "They weren't included in the lower court record, Your Honor," the Solicitor General explained. "That's because the FCC successfully filed a motion to seal them. We obtained them just 3 weeks ago," Musk added, "through a separate Freedom of Information Act lawsuit, finalized in the Ninth Circuit." Justice Kethledge broke in, his voice carrying across the chamber. "Mr. Musk, are you implying that there was a deliberate effort to keep these communications hidden from judicial review?" Musk didn't hesitate. "Justice Kethledge, the documents speak for themselves. The FCC was fully aware that its directives conflicted with this court's precedent in net choice. Instead of respecting that precedent, they sought to get around it by shifting the enforcement into the technical realm." Justice Kavanaugh was now completely engaged. The critical tone she'd begun with had faded into one of serious judicial consideration. "Mr. Musk," she said slowly, "you're presenting more than a citation of precedent here. You're effectively arguing that the FCC used regulatory cover as a tool to pursue goals that violate the Constitution." "Exactly," Musk confirmed. "And not just any constitutional limits, but ones this court, and you specifically, articulated less than a year ago." The courtroom hung in silence. It was a pivotal moment. Kavanaugh, who had initially challenged Musk's stance, was now clearly weighing the merits of what he had presented. "I'm not a lawyer by profession," Musk continued, "but in preparing for this case, I've dedicated thousands of hours to studying constitutional law, because I knew the core issue here went beyond my company." He looked directly at Justice Kavanaugh. "When I read your opinion in Net Choice, your warning about the misuse of regulatory power stuck with me. Then, quoting directly, he said, 'When government authority leverages regulation to achieve what the First Amendment prohibits it from doing directly, the courts must remain especially vigilant.' That principle," Musk added, "was the cornerstone of our response to the FCC's demands." No one spoke. The courtroom remained completely still. Justice Kavanaugh held her gaze on Musk, clearly reassessing every assumption she may have had coming into the hearing. "These weren't just technical rules," Musk went on. "They were drafted to compel our platform to adopt viewpoint-specific moderation. That's not enforcement. It's an attempt to shape speech through pressure. And the internal documents show that was their plan all along." Justice Kavanaugh gave a slow, thoughtful nod before asking the question that would define the case. "Mr. Musk, If your interpretation is accurate, then why has no other platform brought a constitutional challenge like this? Musk didn't pause. His answer was both simple and piercing. Because fighting the federal government requires two things most companies don't have: the resources and the resolve. The easier path is always to comply, even when the demand crosses constitutional lines. I had the means and the responsibility to challenge what I saw as overreach. Kavanaugh looked down at her notes, then back up at Musk. Her voice had shifted entirely from its earlier tone, now calm, deliberate, and almost respectful. Your legal reasoning is far more robust than I anticipated, Mr. Musk. Coming from Justice Kavanaugh, a jurist renowned for her exacting standards, this was no small acknowledgement. The Solicitor General made one final attempt to recover the narrative. Your Honors, whatever Mr. Musk's interpretations may be, the fact remains that X Corp has consistently failed to follow lawful directives every other platform has accepted. But Kavanaugh wasn't swayed. Counselor, she replied, if these directives were, as Mr. Musk alleges, and as the documents suggest, a smokescreen for unconstitutional objectives, then widespread compliance isn't proof of their validity. It's evidence of the chilling effect unchecked regulatory authority can have on constitutional freedoms. The government's argument was crumbling before everyone's eyes. What had initially looked like a routine enforcement case had now erupted into a constitutional reckoning over federal overreach. Kavanaugh turned to Musk one last time. To be clear, Mr. Musk, she said, your position is that X Corp did not simply ignore lawful regulation, but refused to yield to unconstitutional pressure disguised as law. Precisely, Justice Kavanaugh, he said. And we've meticulously documented our constitutional objections at every step, even as the public narrative painted us as merely defiant or non-compliant. Kavanaugh nodded and then looked to her fellow justices. Something fundamental had changed in that room, and everyone knew it. What many assumed would be a courtroom reprimand aimed at a high-profile tech executive had evolved into something much more profound, a sweeping examination of government authority and its limits. Chief Justice Garland finally spoke. I believe we need to hear more regarding these documents, he said. Then, turning to the government's counsel, he added, Mr. Michael Dreeben, this court expects a full and detailed explanation of the communications in question. But the real shift wasn't just that Elon Musk had defended himself, it was that he had fundamentally redefined the scope of the case. Through relentless preparation and an unexpected command of constitutional law, he had transformed the narrative. 3 days later, the Supreme Court made an unusual move. Rather than wait months for deliberation, the justices issued an immediate administrative stay, halting all FCC enforcement actions tied to the contested directives. Legal analysts were stunned. Many described it as a rare and powerful validation of Musk's argument. CNN's legal correspondent Laura Coates looked visibly surprised during a live segment. What we just witnessed was astonishing. Justice Kavanaugh, who most thought would be Musk's strongest critic, essentially acknowledged the legitimacy of his core legal claims. I followed the Supreme Court for decades, and I've never seen anything quite like this. The case exploded across digital platforms. Hashtags like #MuskLegalGenius and #KavanaughMuskShowdown dominated online conversations for days. Court sketch artist illustrations of the hearing were animated and shared widely by news outlets. Former Supreme Court clerks dissected Musk's testimony on legal podcasts, many admitting surprise at its depth. I had to double-check some of the precedents he cited, confessed Yale constitutional law professor Erica Westphal. And I teach this material. Though Justice Kavanaugh herself remained silent publicly, insiders revealed she had instructed her clerks to begin a full audit of FCC communications related to content moderation, going back 3 years. But the effects of the hearing weren't limited to Musk or X Corp. Other platforms began to re-examine FCC directives they had previously accepted without question. Google announced a review of its compliance policies in light of the constitutional concerns raised. Meta, Facebook's parent company, filed a motion to formally join Musk's case as an interested party. Law schools and scholars began poring over the case, with many calling it a pivotal First Amendment moment. The Harvard Law Review even fast-tracked a special edition to explore the constitutional questions now front and center. Meanwhile, pressure mounted on the FCC. 3 commissioners were summoned before Congress to explain the internal communications revealed in court. Additional documents released by Musk's team showed the extent of his preparation. Over 500 pages of case law, legal briefs, and constitutional analysis, all compiled before the hearing. Then, just a week after the proceedings, a former FCC staff attorney came forward as a whistleblower. In a televised interview, She confirmed that internal discussions had indeed taken place. There were clear strategies, she revealed, to use technical compliance as a pressure mechanism, essentially to push platforms into adopting moderation policies that we legally couldn't impose outright. Justice Kavanaugh, once seen as a likely skeptic, was now being praised across the political spectrum. Legal analysts highlighted her impartiality and her willingness to engage seriously with arguments that initially appeared confrontational. Many noted how she had exemplified the very temperament she had promised during her confirmation hearings. In the tech world, Musk's image shifted dramatically. Once seen simply as a brash innovator, he was now being recognized as a serious legal thinker. Stanford Law School even invited him to deliver a guest lecture on the constitutional boundaries of federal regulation. Though the case was far from over, oral arguments would continue, and a final ruling was months away. The momentum had clearly shifted. More and more legal experts began predicting a landmark decision, one that could redraw the limits of how government agencies regulate speech in the digital era. At a press conference outside the courthouse, shortly after the administrative stay was announced, a reporter asked Musk about his surprising legal expertise. "I'm not a lawyer," he said with a small smile. "But when core principles are on the line, you make time to learn." Justice Kavanaugh's own writing on government overreach. "That was my blueprint. I just followed the logic she laid out." Another reporter followed up. "Did you set out to change her mind?" "I didn't come here to change anyone's mind," Musk answered. "I came to present facts and a constitutional argument I believed in." Justice Kavanaugh has always been known for her intellectual integrity. "I just treated her legal reasoning with the seriousness it deserved and applied it to our situation." As scholars, journalists, and citizens continued to digest the implications, one detail stood out: the irony. The government had taken this case to the Supreme Court hoping to make an example of Musk, to depict him as a tech mogul too arrogant to follow the rules. But instead, he had turned the entire case on its head, using the justice's own language to highlight what appeared to be an abuse of regulatory power. Perhaps the most telling reflection came from an anonymous Supreme Court clerk, quoted off record. "Everyone thought this was going to be a classic David versus Goliath moment, with Musk as the Goliath. What we got instead was a constitutional masterclass from someone most didn't even take seriously as a legal mind." And so, the case continued, inching toward what many now believed would become a defining precedent for free expression in the age of digital platforms. This was no longer just about Elon Musk. It had become about the balance of power between government control and free speech in modern America. And it all started with a justice challenging a CEO, only to discover that he knew her own legal opinions better than almost anyone had expected. If this video gave you a different perspective on how power really works behind the scenes, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. We bring you the stories the mainstream media won't touch, the confrontations that shift history. Tap the notification bell to stay informed. You won't want to miss what happens next.